So now we get to the summing up of all of this stuff. The straightness, the forward, the back up, the engagement, the push from the ground. And we're going to call it on the aids. Some people call it on the bit. But it's not about the bit. You could have a horse in a halter, you could have a horse in a bitless bridle, you could have a horse without anything on its head and still be on the aids, because on the aids is not about the bit. The term on the bit is the equivalent, and so many people have gotten so concerned about this one little 3-letter word right here, bit, and missed the intention of on the aids. So again, this is not collection. This is the preparation for the horse being responsive to the rider so that we can then work toward collection. So when we talk about on the aids, the horse needs to be in a frame. It needs to be in front of the leg. It needs to have impulsion. It needs a certain level of straightness. So straightness is a question of degree. There is no perfectly straight body. I don't care if it's a horse or a rider, but there's a relative amount of straightness required for on the aids as the horse moves up in more advanced movements. When we get to lateral movements, one of the purposes of lateral movements is to increase the straightness of the horse and the evenness of the push. So we have to recognize that this is relative to the development of the horse and the stage at which he's at. You wouldn't expect a Grand Prix level straightness from a training level horse. But as you progress and you keep working on these things, it's like a pyramid. So, you know, if we think of a pyramid, and here we're on the aids. Yeah, there we go. And now we want to start working up the levels in dressage. We're going to need a second pyramid, and then a third pyramid, and a fourth one. And what you notice as I build the pyramid is that the base has to get wider and wider and wider to go higher and higher into finally collection. So on the aids is a very beginning step toward achieving collection. But the things that we need here, we still need as we move up. And it just means that they have to get more and more straight, more and more in front of the leg, more and more steady in a frame for us to advance. So to kind of put together on the aids, I'm just going to draw my little horse. And my rider. Okay? I need that if I use my leg, my horse goes, free forward movement. He needs to be remaining in a frame. He can't be pushing his nose out or sticking his hindquarters out the back or hollowing his back or dropping his back down. He needs to use the ground sufficiently to propel himself forward. And if we think of it like a circle, that the push from the hind end is going to travel through the horse to the bit, from the bit through my contact to my body, to my vertical plane. So that this becomes a cycle where the push travels through and I feel that horse. And if I apply an aid, I feel the response in the hind end through to the bit. So this is where we get to a term often used called throughness, which actually isn't a word, but it's an interpretation of a German word that I cannot say. The other way to think of throughness is something I can say, which is permeability. Meaning that permeable is that it flows. So when you have two liquids with a substance on one side, it will flow through a permeable membrane, a membrane that allows that flow to the other side, and it will normalize so that there's an equal content. So you have a high concentration of salt on one side, it will flow across to the low concentration until it's normalized and equal in both chambers. And so when we think about permeable from that perspective, we want this flow to go through the horse to the rider. If the rider asks for the horse to slow, we feel the response through the whole system. If the rider asks the horse to go, we feel the response through the whole system. The contact is simply part of the communication line between horse and rider. So when we say is on the aids, if I use my reins, my horse responds. If I use my leg, my horse responds. If I use my seat, my horse responds. He and I are now in this harmony together, and we are unified because I am with him in that movement, not bracing against him. So we can achieve a harmonious, balanced relationship with our horse by simply being on the aids, where we are together communicating, and he responds to what I ask and I respond to what he needs to help him establish that balance and remain in front of the hand and in front of the leg and therefore on the aids.